There are millions of podcasts being done all over the world that take on the personalities of their creator. Some bring in thousands of listeners each week. Some bring in large amounts of revenue, while others entertain millions and help sell products. If you're like many podcasters, you want to reach your maximum potential. But how? How do you make your podcast stand out from all the rest? Join Dr. Barrett Matthews as he talks to experts who are doing it on The Productive Podcaster. Okay, welcome to another episode of The Productive Podcaster. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews, and I want to welcome you. The Productive Podcaster is a podcast for podcasters. What it's designed to do is to help you to get a podcast out there that brings you in the revenue, brings you in the listeners, by learning from other podcasters about what they do to get their audiences, to get their money coming in. Whatever it is that you define as being productive for your podcast based on what your goals are, that's what this show is designed for. This podcast is designed to help you do that. So hopefully we can help you along the way. We have a great show today. We have a great guest, but we start out our episode with pros and cons.
Pros and cons.
All right, pros and cons is here to help you learn about podcasting. We give you some tips, some pros and some cons. If you don't do some of these things, what will happen? So today, we're talking about trimming the ends, or cutting off, or cutting out, or fading in, or fading out of your podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please, 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 never, ever, ever upload a podcast that hasn't been edited. You can tell, everyone can tell what it sounds like when you have not edited your podcast. I'm telling you, it sounds very unprofessional. It sounds very amateurish. It sounds like, let me just say something and put it up there. And nobody wants to listen to that. Think about it. You don't want to listen to that. So what you have to do is either hire yourself a good editor, which you can do. There are people out there who will edit your podcast, and guess what? Doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. No, doesn't have to cost you a lot of money to do that. But you want to make sure that it's done. Now, you have another option when you're talking about editing your podcast to make sure that the sound comes off as clean, comes off as professional. You can learn to edit. Oh, heaven forbid. Yes, you can actually learn to edit your podcast yourself. You can actually take up some things like GarageBand or some other types of software that you can learn how to edit your own podcast. And you can learn how to do it. They have tutorials out there. You can even just go to YouTube and it can show you how to edit your podcast. Because here's the thing. When the audio starts on your podcast, you don't want it to just be a voice coming in. You'd like a nice little intro, don't you? You'd like some music possibly. Maybe just bringing them in smoothly, just like when you listen to your favorite shows on radio or TV or your favorite podcast. You want it to sound smooth. You want it to come in not abruptly, but smoothly, maybe fading it in. The music coming in, then your voice fading in over top of the music. Or your music can just fade out gently underneath your voice. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But my point is this. When you're listening to a podcast, you want it to sound like the person that's doing it knows what they're doing. You don't want to have a hard beginning. You don't want to have a hard stop. It should come in smoothly. Your sound should come in and it should sound professional, because what you're doing is you're easing your audience into your podcast, and then you want to ease them out. Some of you have commercial breaks. You still want to do the same thing. You don't want to have a hard stop and then go right to commercial, then a hard stop to the commercial, and then right back to your voice. It should ease them in and ease them out. You need to learn how to do this, or find someone who knows how to do it and have them do it for you. But the bottom line is you need to know how to do the production part. The production is the key. If you can produce that podcast to where you know what you want and you can tell someone to do it, then it'll be fine. But if you don't, you're going to lose people. because the con of this pro and con is that if people don't like what they're hearing, they will tune out and they will listen to someone else. That is pros and cons for today. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be back with an interview with Mr. RyanCGreene.
You've heard the rumblings. You even thought about starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all of the hard work for you so that you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODCAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Barrett Matthews, the Productive Podcaster, and I'm excited right now to have a special guest for you right now on the Productive Podcaster podcast. This is a gentleman who actually went to the same college as me. Now, of course, I'm much older, but we did go to the same school at Hampton University. We're quite proud of that. And he is also a podcaster, and he has a very, very good podcast, and I'm going to let him tell you about it. So I want to bring to the Productive Podcaster none other than Mr. RyanCGreene. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Barrett. Thank you for having me on today. Hello to all your viewers, all your listeners. Shout out to Hampton University. Absolutely.
Yes.
So proud of that. A little bit about my show. I am the host of the PassionPreneur podcast. And in that podcast, what we do is we help people make a living doing what they love by turning their expertise into profitable, passion-driven businesses. So if you're an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, or you just know something, you're a content expert, and you're trying to figure out how you can monetize what you know, that's really what the PassionPreneur podcast is all about. We spotlight other business owners, other leaders, and then I also do some teaching and training as well. But it's been a successful podcast. We've been going for this one. I've done several podcasts, so this one specifically, it's been about 3 years now that we've been doing this podcast off and on. So definitely proud about that.
So how did you start it?
Well, this specific podcast, it started from the book. So like I said, I've done podcasts for a while, so I've always been in radio. But with the PassionPreneur podcast, I wrote a book called Becoming a Passionpreneur. So through the book, I teach you the processes and the systems that I use to help people grow their own businesses based on their own content-based businesses. So from there, the natural progression was to build a podcast, something that I can go and I can really teach people on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, how to do it. Started right here in my home office. And I started on, I don't remember the first software. I've done several different host platforms that I've used, but most recently, what I found, the platforms can pretty much all do the same thing. They each have the different caveats, but really when I started to upgrade my equipment to make sure that the podcast sounded professional, that's what I did. I started listening to other people's stuff, and I said, listen, I want to know how to make mine sound like that. So I put in a little investment into some better equipment. And here we are, but it's really been something I've been able to do on my time, from my home. It didn't take a whole lot of money and time to get started doing it.
Man, you just said a lot of things. All these questions going through my mind as you just said all that. So one question I have, because I run into a lot of people because I help people produce podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I get from people all the time is, I don't have anything to talk about. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I see you get ready to smile now when I say that. What comes to your mind when I say that?
I hear the same thing, whether it be a podcast, whether it be any kind of content. If you're providing any kind of content to someone, that's the roadblock people run into. What else am I going to say? What am I going to do? And the easy way is two things to overcome that. One, have guests. Okay, so let them be the story, let them be the content. But also, it's okay to talk about the same subject in different ways. Every show doesn't have to be some huge production, but you're able to give content, and it depends. Also, because I've done shows where it's recorded and it's just me or a guest. I've done shows where I have call in. You have listeners call in, so those are great because you don't have to come up with so much content because your listeners will come in and they'll call in and create content.
Yes.
Issue with that is if you have a show you don't have listeners call in, you've got to fill that content.
You got to fill it. Yeah.
Right. So you got to have enough content
Been there.
just in case. Right. Exactly. Right. So that's the thing. It's fun when they call in, but it's hard when they don't. And you got to fill that content. But I feel like there's so many easy ways to create content. I think that people might just look at content as just too big of a thing, but you can just take little bite-sized pieces and just learn to expound on those, and you'll find content.
I agree with you. Now, one thing you mentioned that I love, because I've been telling people, I just did a broadcast on this about how to start a podcast from your book. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to hear that you did that. What people don't realize is that's invaluable content that you have to talk about. It's your book.
Exactly.
So if you've written a book, you can talk about that. You should be able to talk about that for days since you wrote it.
Absolutely. And, if your book, we're talking, even if it's not nonfiction, but I typically help nonfiction authors and speakers. But even if it's not nonfiction, you have a book that you have chapters. Each chapter in your book can be 1 month of content.
I agree.
And you just take information out of there. And if your chapter, hopefully you're teaching something, you're not just telling a story. But if you've written a book, in a productive way, each subheading under your chapter is a show. So there's so many ways that you can pull that content out. I've done episodes, this is in the past, I've done episodes where all I literally did was read a chapter from my book for the show. Just reading the content word for word, you can hear the pages turning. Really, like you can hear me turning pages on the show and just sharing that content because, we can't think that because you wrote a book that everyone's going to read the book and everyone's going to get the content. Even those who get the book, they may not have read that part of the book because they may forget what's in the book. I'll read my books and forget stuff that I put in the books. Forget.
Of course.
So we can't get hung up on thinking, no one's going to want to hear the same thing again. Trust me, they will. And you never know who's going to listen to the next time.
And that, I agree, because there's an audience for everyone. I went to a conference recently on podcasting. And there's a podcast for every subject you can name. Subjects, I was like, let's put it this way. Subjects I'm embarrassed to mention on this show.
Wow. Yeah.
But there are podcasts, and successful podcasts. I'm talking about podcasts with sponsors, making money on these podcasts. And
make you mad sometimes, right? When you're like, hey, man, how you
what am I doing wrong?
Right. Absolutely, man.
But yeah, so that's something. You mentioned that you help entrepreneurs to monetize their voice. How do you monetize your podcast? And if so, how do you go about doing it?
My podcast, I use my podcast to monetize my program.
Okay.
So, it's two different ways. I would love to monetize my podcast. That's always a goal, but that's not my business model that I've been focusing on. So what I do is I use the podcast as the marketing tool. So I have guests on the podcast, and in my podcast, I'm running my own commercials. So I'm running my own promotions to tell people about events that I'm doing and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. The thing about getting podcast, advertising on your podcast is that, if you got to have numbers. You got to have huge numbers to attract, national clients. Because if you're running a podcast, I could go to local client, local businesses and promote my podcast and advertising opportunities. But if they're a local business and my podcast is international, because anyone anywhere in the world can listen to it, what value am I bringing that advertiser to their business if someone in California listens to my show and my sponsors in Maryland? So you really need people who can provide national services or national companies, or at least, hit the people, they be able to deliver whatever it is. They be able to service people wherever they are. Yeah. So you got to run into that. And then when you get those companies, they want to see big numbers behind.
Yeah, I agree with you. And another thing, I love what you're doing, because I want you to actually talk a little bit about the importance of having a product or having an offer for people when you're doing a podcast, because if you want to monetize, listen, some of us like to hear ourselves talk. Some of us are in this for business. Right. And those who are in this for business, we need to have something to offer people. I'd like you to talk on that if you could.
That's so important. And I wasn't that way when I first got started. When I first got started, and I've been doing a radio since 2006, off and on, not straight through. But
before you answer that, I got to ask you, were you a media major in college?
I wish I was, but I wasn't.
I was. That was my major. That's right.
I was a marketing major. I wanted to do the business side, but I didn't realize then my love would be for media back then. So I would have probably.
It kept pulling me back no matter how I tried to get away. So here I am. So.
I wish I'd have known then. But, I was saying, so the show, before I was that kind of person who wanted to share content. And I think a lot of times, as a content provider, you go through phases. You're like, look, I got stuff I just want to share and help people. And then somewhere along the road, you realize, wait a minute, I need to build a business out of this thing. And that's where that shift happens. And I think that rather than waiting on people to find me and want to tell me I'm valuable and they want to sew into me, I now position the shows that you have to have something. You have to have some kind of business or something that you're driving people to. In my books, I drive them to online courses. In my show, I drive them to my books and my online courses. So if you're providing information, hopefully you're not just providing information. You're trying to provide some kind of solution.
Now, when you started, what kind of challenges did you run into when you started your podcast?
Really just, podcasts are so easy to start now. And then when I started, it wasn't as many, but now, it's just thousands of podcasts. So you run into just getting people to listen, and this is, any entrepreneur is going to run into this, and this is a pet peeve of mine. We all have our networks. We have our circles. We have people who say they love and support us, but they won't share your podcast episode. They won't tell people about your show, but they'll share anything else that runs across their social media.
Yes.
Yes. And speaking about now, and that's my thing, is that our audiences that we do have don't necessarily, either they don't appreciate it or they don't care, or they really don't like what you're doing enough to realize that they have the power to make any person they know famous. And when I say famous, not because for the fame's sake, but because obviously the bigger the name that you are, the bigger your show can be, the bigger impact you can have, the bigger guests you can have. So when I see people who will see someone they don't know and they'll share their funny video out, or they'll share this article out, they'll share this podcast out, and then you say, hey, here's my show, just share it. Just share it.
That's it.
And it's so hard to get people to do that, and the people that support it. And that doesn't mean they don't like you, but it's just that that power, like they harness that power they have to help boost people in their own circle.
No, you're right. You made me think of something that I talked about the other day, and that was, now keep in mind when you listen or hear this broadcast, this is when we're in the midst of going through the quarantine for the coronavirus, and I remember on Instagram they were doing these R&B battles. These Instagram battles. So for those of you who listen, you may not be aware of these artists, you may be aware, but they did one with Babyface. I think everyone knows Babyface, and Teddy Riley. They're both famous music producers and artists in their own right. Well, Teddy had technical difficulties when he did it, the first time when they did it. And a lot of people started these memes about Teddy Riley. Some of them were vicious, but a lot of them were very funny. Yeah. But the thing is, I put a post out shortly after that. I said, you all have made Teddy Riley relevant again. Right. Teddy hadn't done really much since the 90s, but he was relevant again. And just like you said, people have the power to make you famous.
Yeah.
And it's just from sharing. So, and that's something I want to bring up. How important in your podcast is engagement with the audience?
It's critical. It is very critical because you start to build that fan base and that tribe, and that's the people who are going to move you. So, while I talk about how, I wish that our friends in our circles would do that more, I also understand that I can't rely on that.
Right.
And it's my job to produce better content, produce better guests to make people want to share. And if it's not them, then it'll be somebody else. It'll be people.
Yes.
I have a lot more success from people who I don't know personally, but they've interacted with me through my shows or through things that I've done. And those people have been, the biggest cheerleaders for things that I do.
Yeah.
So, it's while there are roadblocks, I don't get stuck on them. I don't, I'm not that person who's going to go in and start posting about stand in line for some Jordans, but you won't go.
You won't go support them.
I'm not doing that, man. Right? Like I'm not doing that. I mean, even if I feel it.
Right. It's not the professional way of doing that.
So
and I like how you did that. You said I have to get more. And this is something I had a conversation with yesterday, and a lot of people, they think that they immediately have to have this large audience when they start a podcast. And I look at it like this. Let's say 20 people listen to your podcast, 20 people. And a lot of people will be very disappointed because only 20 people listen to their podcast. But here's the thing. Ryan, if someone called you today and said they wanted you to speak to their team of 20 people, would you be disappointed?
No, indeed. No.
Right. So that's what you're doing. You have an audience of 20. Entertain that audience. Educate that audience. And it can grow later, but you got to put something into it. Like you said, you invested. That was that stuck out to me that you invested.
And that's the thing about podcasts is that once it's online, it's there forever. So, you may have a show that you did 3 years ago and you don't know what time, what will happen is that, imagine people who did shows 3 years ago about health issues, pandemics, things like that. Now that we're in it, they can go back and say, hey, look at this show I talked about 3 years ago. And now that's the power of the internet, social media, and why someone may listen. You may get 20 live viewers on your show, live listeners, but that show is going to continually grow. It's going to continually be there. And you can always go back and pull content and use it again. And to the point about the equipment, that's one thing when you want to really grow your brand and grow to, build, be able to book bigger guests. If you want to really be able to be seen on the level of some of the major podcasters, major TV show hosts, then you're going to have to make that investment. You're going to have to be able to put money into it. When I started, I was doing my podcast on platforms that you had to call in. And while the content may have been good, you were still listening to people on the telephone. Yeah. And, it wasn't the same as someone listening to someone in the studio. Like you got your mic right there. I've got my mic. So they're out of camera view, but I've got my mic. Yeah. I've got the board where now I can actually take phone calls through my board and sound just like a regular radio show. So those are some of the things that, you want to do up front, because what you don't want to do is have someone recognize you, you get tapped for something big and then you're not ready. So you're
right. Exactly.
So definitely invest in your craft.
So Ryan, before I let you go, I was going to tell the people, please, how they can listen to your podcast, and y'all better share it.
Absolutely. It's got to share it, but it's on www.PassionPreneurPodcast.com. PassionPreneurPodcast.com. You can go and listen to it. It's live. Actually, it's funny, as we talked today, I just was doing some things to switch some stuff over, but it still is a live show. You can go follow it, share it, leave a comment, all that good stuff, because all that helps.
All right. Thank you so much, RyanCGreene, for joining me here today on the Productive Podcaster, guys. Thank you so much, Ryan. We'll be right back.
Great.
You've heard the rumblings. You've even thought of starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all the hard work for you so you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or just go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODCAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
Okay, we're back with the productive podcaster. I'm Dr. Barrett Matthews. Wasn't RyanCGreene great? Wasn't he great? I keep calling him Dr. Greene because he's so professional to me. And he's an alum with me. We went to the same college, so of course I love the man. So now it is time for PodQuest.
PodQuest.
That's right, PodQuest. So this is the time where you get to ask the question from our guest from the previous week. Well, the guest from the previous week was me. So you don't have any questions definitely for me right now. Well, some of you do. Actually, I want to go to a question that was asked of me about podcasting. And that question was, Barrett, does it take a long time to build up an audience? Great question. The question is, do you have an audience now? Do you have an audience of followers right now who listen to you or who actually will follow you on social media, who will go where you go, who will show up at your events? Do you have an audience of followers right now? If you have an audience right now, it could be an email list. If you have that right now, guess what? A lot of them will follow you to your podcast. Yeah. A lot of them will follow you. If you don't, you can organically build it. Now, I know that scares the life out of some of you, but it shouldn't. You can organically build your podcast list. You can promote it through ads. You can promote it through your social media. You can promote it through your email. Let people know you have a podcast. You can show up to other people's podcasts and comment in the section where they allow you to do so. It could be on their social media page. Some of them have it where you can do a chat box, their website. People will see your chat. Don't promote your podcast, but you may throw a question out there asking something about something you can use on your podcast, and they may give you the answer. But the bottom line is, yes, you can have it both ways. You can do an organic reach to get people, or you can just go with the people you already have that are following you. But you always want to encourage people to share your podcast, subscribe. And what you can do then is give to them. Once they have subscribed to your podcast, make sure you're giving them more content. Make sure you're giving them more of what you have. You can do that, and you can start building your list and building people who will follow your podcast. Why? Because they know you are giving to them just for listening to you, and they, in turn, will share that with other people. So that is PodQuest for today. And now it is time for the podcast profile. Our profile today is a young lady who has built quite a podcast for herself, and I love it. It is called Where Minds Meet, and her name is Chantel. I'm not giving her full name because she wants to remain anonymous with the rest of her crew because they talk about some thought-provoking topics. I'm telling you, some of it may be controversial. Some of it may be upbeat and funny. You can determine whatever you think it is. But her podcast, Where Minds Meet, is basically her and some of her friends talking about some great topics, some engaging topics, and they allow you to come in and comment if you like to, be it social media or whatever. But the bottom line is you get to learn what other people think, not just what's on one person's mind. I love the concept and I love the podcast. I'm telling you guys, if you want to have some fun, listen to where minds meet. Now, we have another giveaway this week. That's right. It's giveaway time. The giveaway this week is a podcast checklist. We are giving a podcast checklist of things that you will need to put on a productive podcast. Let me tell you, putting on a productive podcast is not easy. You're going to need to have a lot of things in place, and you want to make sure that you have those things in place before you start recording. Well, we're giving you a podcast checklist from the Productive Podcaster Show. I'm excited because today's podcast checklist goes to, drum roll please. That's right. Today, it goes to none other than Jennifer Harris. Jennifer, you're following the show, and we want to thank you for doing that. You get your podcast checklist. If you would like to get in our giveaway each week, all you have to do is subscribe to the Productive Podcast and go to our Facebook page if you want to do that as well. Follow us and share. Once we know that you have shared the Productive Podcaster, you actually go into a list, and you may get a prize from us. You may get a gift from us. We do our giveaway. So we want to make sure that you can be a part of that as well. And guys, it is time now for the productivity quote. It's the Productive Podcaster Show, so we want to make sure that we keep you guys knowledgeable about how to be productive. And today's quote is, amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. Let me read that again. Amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us get up and go to work. And that is from the author, Stephen King. Yes, you think Stephen King just does horror. Stephen King knows how to be productive. That's why he does what he does. Stephen King, on writing a memoir of the craft, he said that quote, amateurs sit and wait for inspiration, and the rest of us just get up and go to work. So when it comes to you putting together your podcast, are you sitting and waiting for inspiration, or are you going to work? The world is waiting to hear your voice. You've heard me say that time and time again. How long are you going to make them wait? Go to work. Put together your podcast. Stop thinking it has to be perfect. It just has to be started. Once you start it, the world will follow suit. So I'm telling you, stop waiting for the inspiration. You are the inspiration. Be the inspiration. Get up, go to work. That's today's episode of The Productive Podcaster. I thank you guys for joining me. Remember, share, go to our social media, subscribe. We're looking forward to talking to you more next week. I'll see you later. Thank you for joining us on The Productive Podcaster. Be sure to join us next time for another great show. We welcome your engagement, so make sure you participate by joining the Productive Podcaster Facebook group and chime in. Also, share the Productive Podcaster with some of your friends right now. If you have a podcast and you're looking for guests, or if you would like to be a guest on a podcast, join our podcast exchange at www.podcastworlddirectory.com. We'll see you next time.